to the Piedmont Triad Podcast.
Before I get too old, I'm gonna head down to Muscle Shoals. Baby, you can meet me at the station.
Welcome to another episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast, the only podcast that talks about the strange and unusual people, places, and things in the Piedmont Triad, North Carolina area. I'm your host, David Locklear, and today is kind of a bittersweet episode because I did this interview a couple of months ago, and I am interviewing Madam May Horror Frights. At the time, Madam May Horror Frights was a horror host that would host a lot of horror movies locally with Camel City Playhouse, sort of a la Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, Joe Bob Briggs, these types of hosts who really enjoy the look, the vibe, the aesthetic, the feel, the sounds, everything about horror and horror movies, stories, things of that nature. These hosts usually encapsulate that for anybody who is a big horror fan. Madam May was in the process of doing these things and hosting these types of events at the Camel City Playhouse by showing movies like Ginger Snaps, a classic 2000s werewolf movie from Canada. She was also putting together the screenings for Candyman and Evil Dead, I believe. And each one of these events was designed to bring together the niche horror community for us to dress up, enjoy these movies and stories that we have probably long grown up on and have long been a part of our lives. And she was trying to create that here in Winston-Salem, for all of us horror nerds who enjoy doing those kinds of things. And so, unfortunately, sometime in the time between the time that she and I spoke with each other over the phone and the time now in which this episode is going to be published, she has moved back to her home in Wichita, Kansas, and has cut ties with Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is a real bummer for me. I enjoyed interviewing her. I enjoyed talking about all of the possibilities that are going to, thankfully they will manifest in Wichita, Kansas. Now that she is there in Wichita, we'll get to enjoy the fruits of her labor there. It's sad that we here in Winston won't be able to enjoy this because she is a really good person and a great torchbearer for the horror movie community. So with a heavy heart, I invite you to now listen to the interview that I did with Madam May a couple of months ago, where, frankly, it starts out as an actual interview, and we do get to a lot of the important things about her life and growing up and the influence of horror. But I will go ahead and tell you that both of us being big-ass horror nerds that we are, like most big-ass horror nerds, we towards the end kind of devolve into a, did you see this movie? Oh yeah. Did you see that movie? Hell yeah. And it was a lot of fun. I'm not sure if it's going to be silly or entertaining to listen to, but I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it. And Madam May, when you listen to this, I hope you enjoy it, and you're going to be missed. And thank you so much for the effort you put into the Winston-Salem community with the horror movies and with hosting and with your Madam May Horror Frights. I just as soon as I got to meet you, you were gone. So it's a bummer, and I hope that Wichita treats you well. And anyway, I guess I'll quit rambling now. Enjoy the episode. Okay, well, all right. So the way that I discovered you, May, should I call you Miss May, Madam May? What is what's the formal title that I should address you by?
Madam May, absolutely.
Okay. So the way I discovered you was I am a member of the Winston-Salem subreddit, and I see that you have posted on there a couple of times about hosting horror movie show or horror movie screenings at the Camel City Playhouse. Is it every Tuesday?
It was. So currently we're actually in a kind of a transitional period. I no longer work with Camel City Playhouse because of things that have happened. But I am trying to find a new location for the horror movie events to continue on.
Oh, okay. So right now it's kind of like in limbo, but you're still planning on doing this in the future?
Correct. Yes. It's either going to be me who hosts it, or I'm going to have somebody else host it for me while I'm traveling.
Okay. Well, okay. Speaking of traveling, is this part of the reason that you are traveling? Is the Madame May horror show part of why you're traveling, or is this part of your full-time gig that you do to actually make money and whatnot?
Yeah, so funny enough, I actually halfway moved to Wichita, Kansas is where I'm at currently. So the reason why I moved to North Carolina a couple months ago, sadly enough, was my mother got sick, and so I was taking care of her. And then I had an opportunity to move out here, and so I did. But I go back to North Carolina, or at least I'm planning to, every month to help her out, my mother. And so while I'm out there, that's when I'm going to still be running my shows. Oh,
wow. Well, that's a hell of a drive. To be going back and forth. I mean, I'm assuming you're not driving.
Be a lot of fun.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I will be driving. My plan is to hopefully do it once a month there, because actually currently I'm thinking of working with the Aperture Theater over there, and I have a girl who's willing to host the shows while I'm out of town, because I am trying to potentially bring the horror movie Frights here to Wichita as well. Because I would love to make it a job where I travel the country and have this great community of people who love horror movies and love to do the extra pre-shows that we do in the day or before the show, and also all the other aspects of the event.
Okay. And when did this actually get started? When did you actually start doing the horror events? Was it last year?
It was actually this year. Actually, Valentine's Day of this year was our first one.
No kidding. I could have swore that it was going on longer than that. All right. Well, that's good. The word is spreading pretty quickly if it got to my ears already. So that's a good thing.
Yes. Well, yeah. Great. Valentine's Day, we did My Bloody Valentine.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was on a podcast that's based out of Sanford, and he invited me on, and we did not really a watch along, but more of a commentary on both the original My Bloody Valentine and the remake, and kind of pointed out the differences and things that we liked and disliked and whatnot. So I think that's kind of funny that that's how you started, because I just recently got a chance to revisit both of those classics, and it was a lot of fun.
It's so much fun. I'm actually hoping to kind of broaden my audience as well, with doing viewings online. Even though we're not able to get in person maybe every week, but maybe once a month on the Reddit, that's where I do a lot of the communication. We'll have a watch party for people who can't go to the theaters, or who do late night viewings that want to do that. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I'm trying to hope to branch into.
That's a good idea, because I know it's hard for a lot of people to just kind of go out in general. I know that when I had my kids, that going out at night just for the hell of it really fell off the map. And, so having an opportunity to do this just to participate, I think would mean a lot to people. I think that's a great idea.
And funny enough, that was actually a big thing, is that a lot of my audience is older. So I'm only 28, but a lot of my audience is older than 19. And so it was kind of interesting to feel that, sorry, not older than 19, older than 25. And so a lot of the people, they wanted to go out and do movie nights, but then I kept getting messages saying, hey, does it have to be a Tuesday? Can we make it Fridays or Saturdays? And where I was doing my performances and my shows, it just wasn't working out with their schedule. And so that's why I kind of want to do watch parties, is to bring that to the people like you, who have kids, who still love horror movies, but just don't have time or even the money to go out and, pay for all these tickets, because they're super expensive now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's gotten kind of prohibitive to go out to movies like that. And not only that, but everybody is very, very comfortable sitting at home watching movies, unless it's a really, really big deal. So I think tapping into that market is a good idea.
Yeah. I think that it would be a great thing to do, because it just, the whole reason why I started it, I was actually approached by the artistic director, Chris, and he asked me if I would be interested in doing a little bit of a Elvira kind of movie night. And so then I took the idea and I just kind of exploded it into like making it a community event.
Is this, was Chris the one that was over at Camel City Playhouse, or is this Aperture Theater?
Yes. It was Camel City Playhouse.
Okay. Well, that's awesome that, you were asked to do that. Normally, you have to kind of go out and be like, hey, this is what I'm into. Does anybody else want to be a part of this? So the fact that you were kind of prompted into something like that is pretty awesome.
I think so too. And that's kind of what I'm struggling, I'm not going to lie, with right now in Wichita, is because like a lot of people, I guess, because I don't really know the demographic here quite yet because I just moved here, but they're not quite getting to, what do I want to say? I don't know if I'm the kind of entertainment they think that they want, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Winston wouldn't have been terribly friendly to this about 20 years ago. I think that, its recent makeover in the last few years has made it a lot more amenable to stuff like this, which, thank God, we've needed it for a long time. So,
right.
Well, tell me this then. How did you get into horror originally? I imagine that this is something like most of us horror nerds you got traumatized at an early age and you loved it ever since. Am I off?
You're almost there. So super funny. I had a very love-hate relationship with horror when I was younger. So I'm the youngest of 3 kids, and my mom was a single mom. And so whatever my mom watched, I watched, right? And so like, if I wanted to spend time with her. And so I was very traumatized as a child over these horror movies that she loved watching. And I was scared of them for years. And I was scared out of my mind. I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. This is terrifying. But then I had a friend who was actually, she was gothic. She was beautiful. I'll never forget her. She's fantastic. And she wanted to be a special effects makeup artist. And so whenever we would watch horror movies together, she would explain to me how they made the graphics that they did, or not graphics, but like the special effects. And that just made me fall in love with the movies because of the storytelling behind the scenes and also just how the production is made. And I feel like a lot of the time, whenever people think of horror movies, they don't think about what it actually takes to make these movies. They just like, oh, it's scary. But then you see the art form behind it, and it's just fantastic. And I think that's another reason why, like nowadays, even though horror movies tend to be a little bit repetitive and maybe not as scary as they used to be, if the graphics and the special effects are done right, you can see how much care they put into the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of work that goes into that because I'm the same way. I really enjoy the artwork of how they do practical effects and whatnot. Not so much the computer effects, but the real practical blood and gore effects. It's absolutely fascinating how much of a perfectionist you have to be, because I try to put on sort of, rubber foam latex things for every Halloween and see how realistic and how smooth I can make the edges and whatnot. So a lot of the times I'll be watching a horror movie. If I'm kind of disconnected, I'll at least admire what they've done in the movie, where I'm like, oh, you can't really see the seam in that eye gouge. That's really impressive. I wonder how they did that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cause, I'll never forget. I think one of the very first times I was ever exposed to a horror movie, I was, I think, like 2 or 3, and I walked in, my mom was watching The Exorcist, and that was like my first experience with that kind of sensation. But then over the years, you kind of just, like, again, like, you figure out the storytelling behind it. And I love how in horror movies, you get to a very primal fear if it's done in the way you want it to be done. And it's a sensation you will never experience, like, day to day, because of the monsters people create, but also the fact that a lot of them are, what do you want to call it, like a metaphor for other things that we do deal with daily. It's just horror. It's a way of storytelling that you can't do in any other aspect,
Yeah. Yeah, as I was talking to, Damon, he's the host of the podcast I mentioned earlier. We were talking about how a lot of these movies, they can actually be pretty interesting in the way that they reflect current society. A lot of the metaphors for current society fall into a lot of these horror movies. And so you'll look at older movies like The Shining is the one I always come back to, where it's been poured over for years, and I'm currently on the theory that it's, about child abuse and alcoholism, like sexual child abuse and, just all kinds of awful things. But it's so well hidden that you have no idea that that's what it's about until years later. And then you're like, oh, God, that's what the metaphor is. Oh, that's even more horrifying. You're suddenly watching an axe murder and you're going, that's not as terrible as abusing your child.
Right. It's like the guy in the bear suit and like what bears mean in the movie, like all those theories. It's definitely. That's a very fascinating movie because if you just watch it nowadays, I've heard people like, oh, it's really slow. It's not that scary. But it is, once you start thinking about it, you're like, oh man, like that's not great.
Yeah. When you realize certain movies like that, the reason they unsettle you is because there's some part of your soul that is saddened by it. That's when you've run into something very interesting.
Like Hereditary. Oh my gosh, that movie terrified me. I don't know how your opinions on that movie. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I absolutely love it.
The scream, the lady, I know spoilers and everything, but like whenever the daughter's beheaded by the light pole and the way that he reacts to it and he just like sits there in the car. Oh my gosh, that is like the best ever like shock value I have seen in a horror movie, I think ever, because that's really how someone would react. And then whenever Toni Collette's character goes outside and she just does that scream, oh my gosh. It's so good.
That scene, it's been a while since I've watched a scene like that in a movie where I literally was like, whoa, holy shit. I was startled. And then, like you said, the falling action of that awful part where he's just literally in shock. Like he can barely function. Is so brilliant because you're, as the viewer, sitting with what he just did, and now you're observing his shock, and it's like you're sort of weirdly in between. It's almost like you've been a participant and you feel really uncomfortable being a part of that,
Yes.
And what? I think I accidentally may have messed up my youngest. She's 12, but she watched Hereditary not long ago with us. That was a mistake. I do regret doing. She loves it, but she still tells me, she's like, yeah, that was rough. I was like, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I have officially committed you were too young to see that, and now that's probably the story you're going to tell your friends when you get older about, oh yeah, my dad showed me this one movie and that was awful.
Right.
So I assume you loved that movie then, right?
Well, I hated it for the longest time because of the way it made me feel. I just felt so gross, like watching it. And then I would say over the past year, I came to love it. I was like, wow, that's like, it's like on my do not recommend list because a lot of people go, oh, what's a really good horror movie? And I have to know you to like suggest that one just because of scenes like that. And I'm like, I don't want to mess you up too much if you're only used to like Scream, if you're only used to like, Nightmare on Elm Street even, because that's like a different level of that.
Yeah, it's like, you don't want to throw them in the deep end if they're just now getting their feet wet. That's, that one's another one I would say falls into that category. Have you ever seen the movie Martyrs?
Oh, yes. Wait, which one? The French one or the remake?
The French one. I don't even act like the American one exists. I don't even need to see it. Yeah. I know.
I'm not going to lie. I only made it through certain parts of that movie, and I was like, this was too much for me. Because I couldn't do like flat out like torture porn for the longest time. I'm kind of getting to it, but I have a problem whenever people like get skinned.
Oh yeah, I know. Oh,
like the bathtub, that whole scene.
Yeah, I knew I was in for something when I was watching the DVD and the director comes on before the movie comes on and he apologizes for the movie. And I was like, what the hell am I getting into,
Yep.
And it was a good movie, but I'll never watch it again. It was so awful.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. That's one of those movies that you're just like, oof, like, cause the psychology behind it, like, I understand why a person would make the movie. And also, weirdly enough, I understand, how do I put this in words? I don't condone it, but I understand why a person in a sort of state of mind would do what the people did in the movie. Like torturing everybody and like having like the underground what do you call it? Not circus ring, but like the whole entire just operation.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why they did it, and that's why it scares me. Is because like someone could actually do that, and I'm just like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the that weird underground group in the Hostel movies where they pay all this money, but they get tattooed so that way they can't tell. And that didn't seem. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous, but it doesn't seem unrealistic that there could be a group of people who are just that rich, and that's what they do for their fun.
Oh my gosh, Hostel Part 2. I think I watched that on accident when I was like 13 because it was on Sci-Fi. Do you remember like back when they had actual TV, like cable, like Sci-Fi would show like the weirdest movies, and I remember just like sitting there eating it, like eating popcorn, and then I was like watching this movie because it had the girl from Princess Diaries in it. And so I was like watching this movie, and I was like, what's happening? And then I'll never forget it. The part where the chainsaw gets her hair stuck in it and like rips her scalp apart. I was like, oh my gosh.
That movie was just so mean.
Yeah, and then he like drops it, and then he like drops the thing, and like the dogs kill him, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what am I watching?
Yeah, if you weren't expecting that had to be pretty eyeball singeing then, I imagine. So tell me then, okay, if I mean, I've just name dropped a couple of movies that most people probably wouldn't know. So, I mean, you obviously know about all this, but the reason I knew that I would probably get along with you was when I saw that you did a screening of Ginger Snaps, which is probably the poor movie. It has dated so badly. It looks terrible now when I watch it, but I love the notion behind it. That was just such a fantastic low budget movie that is trying to communicate what it is for a girl to become a woman, and that you guys were trying to tie that in to puberty, and you were trying to tie that into this is normal, this is natural, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was a great way of doing it. Can you elaborate on it since I wasn't there?
Yeah, I know it's such a fun thing because whenever I was honestly, this was one of the very first events that I wanted to do because Ginger Snaps is such a good werewolf movie, and a lot of people have never heard of it. And a lot of people there's not a lot of, I'm going to say this, there's not a lot of great werewolf movies, but I think that's one of the best. And it is an allegory for a girl getting her first period and going into, all that stuff with high school and boys and all this stuff. And whenever I thought about that, I'm really big into charity work, and I really want to give back to the community, especially because these events, I wanted to be community events. And so I reached out to a couple of different charities that help donate menstrual products to women and who are like can't afford it, or people in the community itself. And so we partnered with periodmovement.org, and they help people all over the world supply themselves with either reusable tampons and pads, or not tampons, reusable pads, or help other people and like create kind of scholarships and things like that just to help the community out. And so we partnered with them. And then I had a panel of women. One was a burlesque dancer. She belongs to Camel City Burlesque, Celia D. Katz Meow. And then I had Sophie Bott 5000, who is actually a transsexual woman. And then I actually had my own mother on the panel as well, because she's a retired Marine. And whenever she was in the military, she did not have any kind of help with that. And she also was pregnant in the military. She said she was one of the first, especially because she said in the Marines specifically, if you were pregnant, you were not in a Marine Corps anymore. They would kind of push you out. And so I had all three women talk about their kind of transition into womanhood, what they've learned, their experiences. And then we took donations. And we had some really fun things too. Like we had blood bags that were filled with alcohol that we gave people. We had little like snack bags. We had some cookies donated from a local vendor. It was a really good time.
That's awesome. So and you said that was one of your first, I guess, so you had the My Bloody Valentine. Was that like the second or third one? And you had all that kind of a reaction to it, that kind of support?
Yeah. So our first one was My Bloody Valentine. And then we did Leprechaun. We did The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. And then it was Ginger Snaps. And then we did Lost Boys right after that.
Man, all right, nice. That's a good litany of classics right there. That's amazing. But that's great that you were able to turn this into, a good community support type of a system. My wife, she's not big into horror movies, but she's a mental health therapist, so she likes the idea of, community support. So she would have, even if she didn't like horror, she doesn't like horror movies, even though she doesn't like them, she would have completely supported that. I think that's great.
That's actually what we had. We had quite a few people who were there for the panel who donated to the cause and then left before the movie started because they don't like horror movies either. Because that's, like I was saying at the beginning, whenever horror movies, they tell a story, people can relate to it. And it draws people in because it talks about such heavy things. And so my plan was every month, because originally the plan was whenever I was with Camel City Playhouse, we were going to have horror movies every single week. Then once a week, we were going to have charity events. That way, just to help to support the community back. Well, that didn't really work out. And so because I'm doing it once a month, my goal is to always have a community center. Like whenever we do our pre-shows, we either have like burlesque dancers or we had a drag number beforehand. I even sang live at one point. We have like game shows, and it's give back to the community and have the community have a chance to be in a show. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to all the cities that I go to. And so it's kind of a hard thing to pitch to people, but I'm hoping it'll catch on. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say you're naturally going to be hitting an uphill battle with just the fact that it's horror. Horror comes with a stigma, and that's just the way it is. And, you know, it's one of those things where you could kind of complain and bitch about it, or it's like, okay, I can accept this as the reality and maybe kind of move past the stereotypes that a lot of people tend to drop onto it when it's actually far more intelligent than I think a lot of people give it credit for.
Absolutely. Because it just, with the stigma around it, is another reason why I wanted to do charity events, is so that people were more open to seeing it in a different light. Because with Candyman, we did Candyman for one of our last shows when I was there, and I wanted to partner with Black Alliance of Winston-Salem, but I think because it was a horror movie, they got a little scared from it. But I thought that would have been a great thing to do, because every horror movie, there's almost a charity that helps every single one of them. So with Candyman, I wanted to help people who were less fortunate in housing and who were living in projects and who in Winston-Salem needed help like that. And so it's just interesting what you can do whenever you have a group of people together bonded over one thing, even if it is horror movies. And it's not just about monsters, it's just about enjoyment and watching something together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a weird sort of shared trauma that is fun to, you know, connect with other people over, where you're both like, yeah, I watched this and it scared the shit out of me and I couldn't sleep for 3 days. And they're like, oh yeah, I watched this one time and I would never get in a car after that. You know, my mother won't, she'll take showers now, but it was years before she would take a shower after she saw Psycho when she was a kid. Yeah. And that's one of those things where you watch it now and it's damn near quaint.
Right. One movie that I still think about, I double take every time, is whenever I get into an elevator from Final Destination 2. That is like the one I'm like, oh gosh, is this elevator going to just like decapitate me, or what's going to happen? Or like roller coasters with Final Destination 3.
Oh, I know. Or good night, that log truck in part 2.
Oh my gosh.
Every time I see a log truck, I'm like, no. Oh. I've seen what can happen. Even if it was fake, it was real.
It was real, because I see it every time I drive by one. I'm like, that's it. It's over.
So, all this talk of horror, what is your favorite horror movie? I know that's a hard question for a horror nerd to answer, but if there was like a go-to, what do you think it would be?
My favorite horror movie, as a cliche as it says, I love Nightmare on Elm Street. That is my favorite horror movie.
Were you pretty young when you saw that?
I want to say originally I was, and I think I saw it again. I'm trying to think. It feels like it was always one of those movies that I knew about, and that was always like in the background, but I didn't really fully dive into it until I probably was like 17 or 18. And then I found out what I liked about Freddy Krueger specifically, because it's his humor. That's what I loved about it. It's whenever he kills you, he's having a lot of fun, but also I'm pretty sure he knows how horrible of a person he is. And so it's the kind of angle that he has. And I was actually able to work with Robert Englund very briefly when I lived in San Antonio, and he is terrifying. I will never forget when I walked into the room, because I was warned about him from the person I was working with. They're like, just letting you know, he is Freddy Krueger. He is the most terrifying person you will ever meet. And then I met him in person. I was like, oh my gosh, you're so scary. And he's nice, so nice. But his voice and his mannerism, he truly embodies that character.
Oh man, yeah, that would be a head trip for me. I don't know how well I would handle that just talking to him. I think he's one of the few people left in this world that I would get really starstruck by. But yeah, that would, if he sounds like that all the time, yeah, that'd kind of wig me out a little bit. It would take an adjustment period.
All the time, yeah. The only person that two people I really wanted to meet when I was working with, so I worked for conventions with a photography company that did celebrity photo ops. Mm-hmm. The two people I always wanted to meet was Sigourney Weaver and Danny Trejo. Those were like my two go-to. Sadly, I never did, but I love Ripley. Like, I think Alien is also one of my top 5 favorite horror movies.
Oh yeah, yeah. Another one of those that when you're younger and you, like you said, caught it in the middle of the night on TV at 2:00 in the morning, and you don't know what you're watching. Oh yeah, that will level you for sure.
Oh, and the way they took it, the direction they took it is very strange. But I love Sigourney Weaver, and I love just like the premise of the Alien, the first one. It's because as a woman, it's really refreshing to see a woman that's not dumb in a horror movie. Yeah. And it's nice to see a woman who survives by herself because she's smart, and also she saved her cat. And I'm a cat lady, so that was a great movie.
I know. I have a friend who would argue that cat personally got 2 men killed, and that cat should be killed himself. But
absolutely not. Those men deserve to die.
Oh man, well, yeah, and I that was one of the things I loved about Alien was that I liked it because she was a woman. She didn't seem like she was written as a man and then they put a woman in this position. That drives me crazy when they do that in movies where a woman is running around and she's rattling off things where you're going, I don't think her character would say that. You don't seem like the type that would say that. Seems like something Stallone would say. So hearing her actually have conversations with people, and she's using her logic, and she's also trying to understand what her position is with all these other people. And yeah, it's just absolutely wonderful watching her struggle and succeed. I thought it was great. I think it's still one of the top female characters in a movie.
Oh, easily. I love, like you were saying, she doesn't feel like a woman put into a man's place, but she also doesn't feel like a woman that was written by a man.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It's because she's not ditzy. She's just surviving and she's doing what it takes. She's not like, I don't know. It really bothers me in movies. Like, I love tropes in movies. Like, why is the female so dumb?
Yeah. Or anytime, another trope that drives me crazy is anytime that you have a main female character who is smart and doing things, and then suddenly she feels like she's got to use her sexuality to get in or out of a situation. And I'm like, I was kind of on board, and now this just kind of feels exploitative.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the movie that I was watching, because sometimes with horror movies and teenagers, it gets really weird really fast. Did you watch the new Evil Dead movie?
I did, yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say spoilers on this podcast.
Yeah, we'll
say
spoilers, and then, if you haven't seen Evil Dead, you might want to cut this off now. Okay, go.
Okay, perfect. So I was really nervous seeing teenagers in the Evil Dead movie just because of how, not weird they get, but how graphic they usually are. But I was really excited to see them die. I know that sounds horrible, but a lot of the time, whenever you have children in movies, they can't die. There used to be a law against that. And so whenever the movie first started, I looked at the teenagers and I was like, oh, great. This isn't going to be extra gory as it has been in the past or as much blood. But they delivered pretty well on that.
Yeah, they did. And I have to give them credit. I was worried that this was going to be a really lame Evil Dead just because when I saw the preview, I felt like I was getting some strong substance abuse metaphor vibes, and I was like, this has been done a million times, and it is kind of it is a metaphor, but thankfully it's not a drug thing. I feel like it was much more of a metaphor for the struggles of motherhood and mental illness, like these kids possibly dealing with a mother who might have a mental illness. I've heard stories of people having to deal with, and that's mom was like a monster when she was off her meds and things like that. So it actually ended up being more interesting to me, metaphor-wise, than I expected. I really had low expectations, and they surprised me.
Yeah, I 100%. I understand that in more facets than one. It was an interesting movie because I'm not gonna lie. When I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is okay, because I didn't like the whole we're in an apartment building now and it has to tie in somehow. Mm-hmm. I'm never a big fan of those, but the way that they went about it was pretty good. Yeah. I still think it's one of those movies, though, if you just would have changed the name, no one would have known it was Evil Dead.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I forget what they call that. There's some phrase for it where they take a script and they slap an established IP on it, and then they call it the new movie. I did get some of those vibes from it, but since they executed it so well, I kind of forgave them. I want more Evil Dead. That's just how I am.
I love Evil Dead. It's awesome. Evil Dead. I love it. I loved what's it called? The one from 2013. I was just like, oh my gosh, because it's way different than the original one, and then you're just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I thought it was impressive because they didn't really bring in any of the silly slapstick humor that 2 and 3 had. You know, it was almost like it was specifically going for the very first Evil Dead vibe, where everything was just completely serious, and I enjoyed that. I thought it was cool.
I did too, and I watched it recently, a couple months. Oh, I watched it literally the day before I watched the Evil Dead Rise, and I watched 1 and 2, and it was interesting. Sorry, I watched 1 and 2 of the original, and then I watched the 2013 version before I watched Evil Dead Rise, and it was interesting in the 2013 version how much of the dialogue they take directly from the first 2 movies, but they say it in such like a serious way. But I really like the 2013 version. Now, that's one of those movies, too. I don't know if you remember this back in 2013, though, when they had the previews on like YouTube, on TV, how terrifying they were. Yeah. Because it would be like midnight and you were like watching like some weird something on YouTube and then her face would pop up and you're like, oh my God.
yeah, because they kept on showing where she's in the cellar with her eyes, and you know, we were going to get you. I was like, that's pretty funny. Yeah. Look at them getting us.
Exactly. I was like, dang, like that's so scary. Yeah.
Well, considering that you are a horror movie host, I'm assuming that you are pretty decently versed in the Elvira universe, all of the macabre monster hosts and whatnot. Is that correct?
Yes, I love her. I actually just finished her biography. I listened to it on Audible. It was so good.
Really? What kind of life did she lead? I'm sure she's not a bore.
No, and so it's funny because she's from Manhattan, Kansas, and now I live in Wichita, Kansas. So it's like we flip places. I was thinking about that on the way over here. Her entire life is so fascinating because she has such an appreciation for life, and you can tell she's met death more than once at the front door, which is why she's so gravitated towards horror movies. And she always says that because she talked about how she almost died when she was 3, and because there was a pot on the stove and she pulled it down on her face and she got like 3rd-degree burns all over her body, and that's why she had like a whole bunch of scarring. And she said that she related to the horror movies because of the monsters look like her kind of thing. And then she was just talking about how she was like in Rome and how she became like a stripper in Las Vegas when she was like 17. And she went on like these dates with like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these people. And I loved it because her character is not just in the movies, but it's also her real life. I look up to her because, yeah, she's sexualized, but in the way she allows it. You know, she's very... Yeah, at 17 in Vegas, she went on like dates with like Arnold Schwarzenegger and like all these people. And so she had a really unique life before Elvira. But with Elvira, I love how she took a hold of her like sexuality, even though she was a sexual creature, is the way she put it. But how she's the one that owns it and how she was as sexual as she wanted to be. And it's really unique because a lot of women don't get that chance to be in that position. And so I loved learning from her.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I guess when you think about it, a lot of the actresses or models and whatnot, I mean, I guess that they accept that there is some sort of level of sexuality to it, but I guess they don't really have control over it. That I've never thought about it like that before. So yeah, being able to define it on your own terms must be pretty Pretty cool. I mean, that would explain a lot of longevity for her too, because if she wasn't beholden to somebody else, that was her brand.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I said I got to meet her in person at one point too.
Oh, is she pretty nice? I've heard she's a cool lady.
Lovely, lovely lady, and just she's very humble and very down to earth. So, funny enough, I think she and Danny Trejo have a lot in common, because people who meet Danny Trejo talk about how humble he is because he was in jail, and that's what made him want to become an actor. And so I feel like both of them are on the same playing field of humbleness because of where they've been in life and what has happened to them.
Right. Yeah. Danny Trejo is pretty famous for talking about the reason that he's in acting is I think every time he plays a bad guy, he makes sure that they get killed to send the message that crime doesn't pay, which I think is awesome.
Mm-hmm. I was actually just watching Breaking Bad with him in it. I was like, oh, I forgot.
That's funny. We were watching it last year. Oh man, the turtle.
Yeah, Tortuga. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That was scary, that whole part.
Yeah, because it was so casual. That was horror-ish, the way it was just so, well, look, here's a head on a turtle. That's horrifying. Oh, it blew up. Everybody's dead. Well, tell me, okay, so you have been hosting these movies for a few weeks now, so you're going to be looking for a new place, probably. It sounds like you're going to be leaning towards Aperture as being sort of the new home for Madame May's Horror Frights. What kind of new things do you think you might start implementing once you settle into a new location? Are there things that you're going to expand on? Are there, like, say, genres of movies that you're going to focus on? What's the plan?
Honestly, the plan is to kind of figure out what the community itself likes, because I know they really like the drag show or the burlesque shows kind of implementing for the pre-show, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback, like Jeopardy, or we do kind of games like that. And so whenever it comes to pre-show and anything that is not film related in the aspect of actually showing the film, I really do take feedback from my community. And so I'm looking for like live bands, a band that reached out saying like, hey, I can perform, you need. And then we're going to try to get like street artists to come in and kind of play their art. I really just want the community to be involved. And with Aperture, because it's an actual movie theater, I think it'll be a really cool.
Yeah, in Aperture, they really seem to have a real good grasp on what the community is looking for and what their purpose is in this community. I think that they've done a great job of inserting themselves and providing that sort of underground vibe that I think a lot of people need in Winston that has been lacking for a long, long time. Have you ever worked with Carlos Bocanegra at Monstercade before? Oh,
actually, I was going to reach out to them, but they were like booked up for the year. So I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, man. Okay, well, I mean, good for them, but wow. Okay. Yeah, because they host a lot of drag shows and I think BDSM stuff and whatnot, and they're real open. Like they're kind of the Wild West over there, which I really appreciate. So I feel like your particular brand would fit right in over there.
Yeah, I'm planning on reaching out to them, especially whenever the year kind of comes to a close when they're trying to plan for next year. Mm-hmm. I'm going to see what I can do.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, because I'm a big advocate for anything horror related when it comes to the community in general, because I don't know. I feel like horror really does kind of speak to the outsider, outcast sort of nature of a lot of people that I think I feel like it's addressed, but I feel like most people don't fully understand why someone who is into it is into it. And and I really feel like it should there should always be this kind of outlet for the sort of outcast community. So having this, horror themed makes me so happy, because I feel like that means the town is going in the right direction.
Yes. Actually, the lady at Aperture I was talking to, she mentioned how a lot of people are now getting more into horror movies in the mainstream. And so looking on take on the show. And so she says that because there has been, I don't say more horror movies come out recently, there has been a big press on, I guess, ever since Scream.
Yeah, and like with Aperture, they had, I guess it was about 2 months ago, they were playing the original Friday the 13th at 10 o'clock at night or something, and I was going to go to that, and I never had a chance to, but I love the idea of being able to do that, to go to a movie theater and see a classic horror movie on the screen. There's something about that just cannot be duplicated, and I love that they're trying to host that, too.
Absolutely. And I don't really care who does the horror. I just think that there needs to be somebody there doing it, because I am willing to support whoever will support this community, because it's not like me versus everybody else, or like everybody else versus me. It's just we're all working together as a network to provide horror movie viewings to people.
And have you run into any kind of pushback from anybody since you've started this? I mean, I know it's still pretty young, but anytime something like this comes up, I feel like there's always going to be a group going, no, 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 no.
Not necessarily from the audience or potential audience per se. The only kind of pushback I've gotten, actually funny enough, is about drag at the beginning of the shows. There was a comment saying, like, I don't understand what drag have with this. And it's like, okay, well, you don't know what drag is, so.
Be like, well, have you ever, seen, let's say, actually, that might sound offensive. I was going to say, have you ever seen Sleepaway Camp, but that might be considered.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily an argument or an advocation for positivity. That was more like about child abuse. Never mind. I take it back. I retract
it's okay.
my
Well, because that's what drag is, though. Yeah.
So sorry.
Drag is all about putting on a character and performing. Yeah.
Okay.
I get where you're coming from.
Okay. All right. So I'm not wrong. I was just sitting there as the words were coming out of my head. I was like, wait a minute, this might be bad.
No, you're so good.
Okay.
Don't even worry. That was actually one of the movies we were thinking about showing.
That's one of those ones I feel like it's got such an odd history, because it's not terribly great. It was just that it was such a shocker at the time, because no one really knew it. And it was like, everybody kind of kept it quiet. They're like, oh, have you seen Sleepaway Camp? No. Hey, you should check that out. It's got an interesting ending. That's about all anybody would ever say. So you get to the end of that thing, you're, oh my God. Okay. Didn't see that coming.
You're like, oh my gosh. Okay. It's a classic, though.
It really is. I know. It's one of those ones where you should see it just because it informs so many later titles that you don't really understand. I feel like there are a lot of movies like that where you've got, The Exorcist and Shining. Those are the big ones. But then you got those weird underground ones that people don't understand. It's like, no, this had a really big impact. Like, I don't feel like Evil Dead truly got its due until sometime in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. When it was like everybody had finally seen it after 20 years. Right.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think if there was another movie I was thinking of that I can't even remember, but there's a movie I was thinking of was like the precedent. Here's one that's interesting. Like Interview the Vampire. I was, have you seen that one? Okay. Yeah. So, with the whole Anne Rice, somebody was explaining to me that movie was the first time that vampires were beautiful. Beforehand, they were always monsters of the night. Like, sure, Dracula was pretty and like a handsome man, but they weren't pretty in like conventional sense. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That makes me kind of want to revisit that one, because I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Oh, it's so good. It's
really?
Actually such a good movie. I know it's such like a mom movie, but it's so good.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, does it hold up? Because there are a lot of movies I've revisited recently. Like I revisited Big Trouble in Little China not long ago, and I loved I loved it as a kid. But I was watching it this time. I was like, oh, I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this, but it's not a good movie. It's not very good.
Yeah, it's seen better days.
Yeah. So that's good to know. I'm glad Interview is held up. I'll have to give it a whirl. But oh man, anymore. When someone's like, oh, you remember this movie? And I'm like, yeah, and I want to remember it that way. I'm afraid to revisit it. I'm afraid I'm going to get damaged.
Absolutely. That's how I feel about, it was like The Labyrinth. And I love that movie. I love David Bowie. But whenever you watch it now, you're like,
Oh, man. Him walking around. Oh, my gosh. His package was awfully distracting.
Oh my gosh, yeah. You're just like, my goodness.
I mean, the dude looks like he's smuggling grapefruits in his tights. It's like, come on, man.
I love that. For some reason, it's probably because it's Jennifer Connelly in both movies, but did you ever watch Requiem for a Dream?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is a horror movie. I don't know if it's labeled underneath that, but that's one thing about horror movies, too, is like, it might not be labeled horror, but sometimes it crosses into that threshold. And like, whenever I watched her both those movies, I watched The Labyrinth, and I was like, you have no idea what's about to happen to you. Like,
right. Yeah, when they start saying Maid Marian, it's like, ooh, you better brace yourself. This is getting ready to get bad. Yeah, but I agree. I 100% agree. I've seen plenty of movies where you're watching it and everything's sort of seemingly normal, and then like a 5-minute horror movie shows up in the middle of it, and then it keeps going, and you're going, wow, that was startling and out of tone. Have you ever seen the movie Bone Tomahawk?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's 90% Western, and then you have that one scene, and you're like, what the fuck just happened? What did I just watch?
Or did you ever watch, speaking of Bone, but did you ever watch The Lovely Bone?
No, I never did see that. That's one of those ones that kind of was on my radar and I never got around to.
It's such a good movie, but at the very, like, I would say that's like 30 minutes is a horror film, and it's so scary.
Really?
But it's a good movie. Mm-hmm. Because it's about being abducted and raped and murdered as a child, and you're like, oh my gosh. Oh. Yeah.
Ooh, that's rough.
It's a very intense movie. Yeah.
Oh, damn. Okay. I mean, I see, again, as awful as that sounds, I'm still kind of like, I mean, I'll watch it. You know, I know a lot of people will hear a description and they're like, nope, want no part of that. And I'm like, I'll check it out. What the hell? You know, I've got a morbid curiosity.
Exactly. Because, like, it's like where she gets murdered, but then she's trying to, like, find peace within herself. So it's not an actual horror movie, but it's the first. I mean, Stanley Tucci is the murderer, so it's terrifying. But,
no kidding. He's a good actor. He's like usually pretty nice. That's interesting. That's a twist for him.
It was a twist, and I didn't expect it. I was like, wow, like, you're too good at that. Do you remember when I was just gonna say, do you remember whenever Jim Carrey did 23?
Yeah, that movie was terrible, but yeah, I remember that.
It was a horrible movie.
But I wanted to like it. I really did, because I liked the idea behind it, and I wanted Jim Carrey to do well because I liked him at the time.
Me too.
And that movie just sucked.
It was not it.
Yeah, I hated that. All right. See, I'm in that place where I now want to just talk about horror movies, and I'm just going to do that. I don't care. Have you ever seen a Serbian film?
Nope, I will not. I have read the description of it.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, that was one of those ones I got done. I was like, all right, I think that's my limit right there. I don't think
I was like, I saw Human Centipede, and it was about to make me go down a certain alleyway, and I was like, nope.
Speaking of repeat viewings, we watched, my wife and my oldest, she had never seen the very first Human Centipede. And she was curious, and I was like, you know what? I remember, because I've seen 1 and 2. And 2 is literally horror. Like, it is one of those things you just don't recommend to people because it's over the top. But 1, I remember it being kind of silly. And so I was like, all right, we'll watch it. And I was right, but it still had some horrifying parts in it where I'm like, oh, yeah, dude, close your eyes. Wait, hold on. I remember
exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what happens to me sometimes, too. I'm like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah, the Human Centipede is mostly funny, but I was surprised at how well it held up. We were sitting there watching it, and I was like, no, it's still compelling. Like, it wasn't a bad movie. It was a low-budget movie, and the concept is, depending on your taste, horrifying, but it was still a well-crafted film. I was impressed on my second watch, but I'm not sure that I'm willing to go down that road for part 2, because the first time I watched part 2, I was like, that was rough. I don't know that I need to see that again. I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think there's something I'm trying to discover, especially with horror movies. There's so many different facets. And so, like, I don't like when people get skinned. You know, it's just not something I enjoy watching.
Yeah.
But I think I have a problem with, like, babies specifically. And so whenever I learned about that part about the baby, I was like, Same thing with, like, Serbian film. Weirdly enough, a lot of that stuff didn't bother me. But that whole entire baby thing was, like, a little bit too much for me. And I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's and I've read what the director said about it, how it's supposed to be like a metaphor for something like the rape of the Serbian people by the government and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, whatever. That's still disgusting, dude. It's
absolutely.
Just, I get what you're doing, but you got to understand that's not going to have a mass appeal. There's going to be like 3 people who are going to think that's cool.
Exactly, yeah, and they're weird people, which is fine, but, yeah. One movie that I'm really surprised held up as well as it did, and I know that there's a Japanese original, but The Ring, like from 2001, that actually held up very, very well, I thought, compared to what it was, yeah.
No kidding. That's good to know, because I haven't seen that since probably around the time it was released, so that I wouldn't mind watching that one again, because all we have, is the American reference, which is actually a decent American-made movie. But yeah, the original is always going to be superior. So
and that's the thing with those foreign films. I don't want to say those foreign films, but like foreign films, like Asian horror is on a whole nother level, and sometimes it's just like too much for me. I think I watched this movie. It's called like White or something like that. And I don't remember the film all the way, but I just remember how it made me feel. And like getting into like Japanese horror is like this whole entire different ballpark, or even like Korean horror. Because I know on Netflix, there's been like a rise in Korean horror films, like Train to Busan and Parasite and things like that, which I don't remember if Parasite's technically classified as a horror movie or not. But I don't know if you ever saw Train to Busan.
Yeah, that was really good.
That actually, I think is hands down my favorite horror, like zombie movie. Because I'm not that big into zombies, just because like you got to do it right for me to make me like it. But that one I thought was really well, because they played on the humanity part really, really well.
Yeah, I think that's what a great deal of mainstream horror tends to miss, is that you have to really be concerned about the characters in the movie most of the time, not always, but you do have to be concerned about the characters in order for it to be good, in order for the horror to make the impact. Because there's so many movies where it's like, all right, these characters are hateable, and then, something horrible happened to them, and then you're like, whatever. But then there are movies like what you said, Train to Busan, where you're sitting there going, oh no, I feel so bad for you're actually caring about the tragedy occurring on screen, as opposed to it just being a body count.
Yes, right. Because like the way that like the guy hid his bite, but then like the whole businessman like sabotaging everything, you're just like, dang, like that could actually happen. Because I think they represented personalities of people really well, really well.
Yeah, I think
kind of like in 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later is so intense, and 28 Weeks Later, like, whoo! But those are interesting films.
28 Days is 100% like my favorite horror, well, not horror movie, like zombie movie, just because of the way it subverted everything that had been done with zombies up to that point, and it just kicked like new life into the zombie genre in general. And I still to this day, I love that end scene with the main dude finally becoming a killer in order to protect the two girls. It's like that whole last scene, like the last 30 minutes of that, I can watch that over and over again. Him just coming in and taking them out one by one. I was like, oh, that's so awesome. That's such a good movie.
It came out at such an interesting time, because when did it come out? 2001? 2000,
something like that,
like around that time, and how it was the activists that started it all, because they were trying to free the animals, and I thought that was such an interesting like political like thing, like, hey, I know you want to save everything, but you got to do it in a proper order, or else everything else could like potentially like die. And I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, like the scientist at the beginning, I found very sympathetic, where he's just like, I know what you're trying to do, but you really can't do this because you're getting ready to ruin the world.
I was saying how my mom, she was in the military and she worked on like chemicals and things like that. Like she was NBC, if anybody knows what that is. But we were watching I Am Legend, and she told me in the movie theater whenever everybody was changing because of the cancer, like not vaccine, what's the word, the cancer antidote. And she turned to us and she's like, "That can actually happen." I like looked at her, I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "I worked on that." And she's like, "Sometimes that would happen." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" So,
oh man,
yeah.
Oh, I would. I think at that point, I'd just be like, "Dude, I would have lived my life happily not knowing that shit." Thank you for ruining my day.
Right? And I was like 11. I was like, "Thanks."
Right. Oh, I did something similar to my poor daughter. I still regret this. Poor kids, they're going to be all screwed up. Anyway, we'd watched Finding Nemo 1,000 times, and I remember they got older, and I remember reading a theory that this guy put forth that Finding Nemo is actually about the marlin, the fish. It's a metaphor for him letting go of the death of his wife and kids, and that Nemo doesn't exist. It's just a metaphor in his head to help him move on. And that's what that Nemo is not there at all. And that at the end, when Nemo is saying bye and he disappears and he's like, "Bye, son," that's him saying, letting go and saying goodbye, which makes the movie 5,000 times more tragic than what it actually is. But she was a little bit older. I thought she might find that interesting. She has not let me live that down. She's like, "Yeah, you remember that time you told me about what Nemo's about?" Like, do you remember ruining my childhood? I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, because that's what Nemo means. Nemo means no one. And I was like, "Well."
Oh, I didn't know. No kidding. Oh,
yeah,
man.
It actually, because there was that movie that Jared Leto did, where his name was Nemo. I can't remember, but that's when I learned about that. I was like, "Oh, like it literally means no one, Mr. Nobody." That's wow. Such a weird movie. I don't know if you ever watched that one, but
I don't think I've even heard of that with Jared Leto.
I don't know if I recommend it. No, I don't know if I recommend it.
Okay,
Jared Leto. I love him on Fight Club, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Ever since he started that weird cult thing where he looks like Christ, I'm like, yeah, this dude's got some screws loose. I don't think I want to be a part of his gig anymore.
Yeah. Great music, but not a great actor.
Right. Okay, before I could do this for about 4 or 5 hours just chatting about horror movies. I should at least get to the place where we're going to, I want to tell everybody, where I want you to tell everybody, where can they find Madam May? Like, where are all the places they can look for you, find out when you're going to be having new events, anything that they need to know about how they can be supportive of you and your cause. Where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Reddit. So it's Reddit, r/Madam May Horror Frights with 1 T, no S. And I'm on Instagram as Madam May Horror Frights. And then the same thing with the email is just Madam May Horror Frights @gmail.com. And it honestly, the tell people just want to participate in the show, in the pre-show, or can like recommend things, or if they have even artwork to sell or t-shirts to sell or anything like that they've created, because that brings in the community aspect, and that's just what makes it worth it for me.
Oh yeah, that's okay. That's great. I like that too. My wife tries to do that in her business, use local artists to decorate the office and whatnot, because it's it's just important. It's important to support everybody around you. So I think that's great. So yeah, good. Okay, that's good to know for everybody who wants to go and check out Madam May's Horror Frights. I'm sorry that I need to kind of bring this to an end, but I know how I am. I know I can continuously chat because I'm wanting to ask you about, have you seen The Descent? And, it's like, but it'll be less of an interview and more of a, you remember this?
Yeah.
If I spin too far off. But now that I brought up The Descent and you seem to know it, what do you think?
Oh, it's so good. That was one movie I was scared of too, because I think it was 2006 or 2005 it came out, and it was so intense. And I was younger when I watched it, so I didn't really understand like the whole betrayal between Naomi or whatever her name was, and then the UK ending versus the US ending. It gave me very much the like The Hills Have Eyes vibe. That's how I went.
Yeah, it really does kind of have that sort of desert isolation vibe to it. And I remember when I brought home the DVD for the first time and I saw the UK ending and I was like, oh shit, that's where it ended.
Yeah.
Oh, what a bummer. She doesn't make sorry, spoiler.
She doesn't make it out.
Yeah. And one she makes it and one she doesn't. You choose. It's like a choose your own adventure.
Exactly. I like the US version. But that just makes me happy. But oh gosh, that's so sad.
It really is. It's like she got cheated on, her kid died, and now she's going to die in this cave alone with these monsters. Yeah, I mean, that is kind of a bummer ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. She should at least be able to escape.
I will say this, because on this note, I always wonder in horror movies, whenever they escape from things like that, what is their mental mindset afterwards? I would love to see a horror movie of people who have gone through horrors, and then the sequel be like how they kind of overcome them or cope with them or turn into killers themselves. And I know that there's movies like that, but I would love to see like the aftermath of what's happened. Because Nightmare on Elm Street 2 kind of did that with that weird kid that was across the street. Yeah. But yeah, that would be an interesting thing, because like what happens to her after she leaves the cave if she does survive, you know? Like how does she keep going on?
Yeah, the one of the ones that comes to mind for me is Friday the 13th Part 4, how it starts up almost literally after where 3 leaves off. And I remember the girl from Part 3, she's kind of like, I think she's thrown in the back of a cop car and she's losing her shit, and that's about all you get. But yeah, it would have been interesting to explore that a little bit more, because you saw the damage that, you know, she sustained mentally, you know, as well as physically. But I think that would be kind of cool to explore, because there's no way you could live through something like that and not have some kind of long-term trauma that's going to affect you.
Right. It's kind of like the Babadook, how they kind of resolved it at the end, how she kind of learned how to cope with living with it.
Yeah. Babadook. That was one of those ones I saw it way after the hype, and it was just kind of by the time I saw it. Seems like that happened with a lot of people with The Witch. I remember when The Witch came out, I loved it, but it got talked about so much, so many people were like, oh, it wasn't very scary. It's like, well, it's not really the kind of movie that's supposed to be scary. You know, it's supposed to be upsetting. And anyway, that's just me. This is me going off on a sidetrack.
The Witch? You ready for this? The Witch? Yeah. I don't get it. I watched it twice, and I'm like, I don't quite understand.
Oh, no kidding.
I am. I'm so sorry. I just I watched it, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. Amazing, because I've actually lived with people like that. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, that would actually explain a good bit then. Yeah, I didn't expect to like Hereditary just because there was so much like dysfunction in the family in that movie, but it ended up being so good I didn't mind. But usually if things are really dysfunctional in a family in a movie, I'm like, yeah. I kind of lived through that. I'm good. You know, we can move on to something else.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's part of the reason why I'm into horror as it is there was some dark part of me that was like, oh, that's what this feels like. You know, it's like it was given definition. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a coping mechanism, or it can be. I'll say this. One thing I was doing for movies is, would I be supporting, how do I put this in words? Some horror movies kind of support the idea of suicide, like Guillermo del Toro's The Orphanage kind of supports suicide because she had to kill herself. And so that was one of my concerns.
And if I ever do a movie that has a suicide in it, like the character or whatnot, I'm actually planning on like pairing with a suicide prevention group to like have it support that.
That's a good idea.
But yeah.
Because I think a lot of people do that they see something like this in an artistic medium, and it can be easily misinterpreted as endorsement. And I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think horror movie is interesting. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you chatting with me about all of this. I would love to come out and see one of your screenings when you start getting those up and running again. So definitely let me know when you do that, and I'll see if my kids want to come out and we kind of make like a family thing out of it, because that would be fun. They're big into the horror movies. Even if mom isn't, me and the girls, we can do it. We can enjoy it.
Absolutely. I'll let you know. It'd be great to meet you in person.
Yeah, I would love to do that too. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and talking to me about all of your shenanigans that you have going on. And what I'll end up doing, it's probably going to be a few weeks before this episode comes out. And if you end up finding out like that you're about to start something, like if you kind of have a go ahead on whenever you're going to get going again, if you want to, you can let me know, and I can try to coordinate this episode coming out around that same time to kind of give it a bit of a bump if you would like. But if it's going to be a little while, I'll just let you know when it's going to be published, send you the link and all that kind of stuff, and just let you know what's going on with it. But
absolutely,
yeah, it shouldn't be more than a couple of weeks, probably sometime mid-June, like mid to late June.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you know. I'm trying to get something going for. I want to Suspiria in August is what I'm thinking.
Oh, okay.
So I'll let you know that. The original Suspiria.
Yeah. Okay, well then now I have to ask you, did you like the remake?
I liked the mirror scene. It was okay. I love Tilda Swinton, though. I will say that. I love her.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's just amazing.
Yeah, she's a solid actor. I like anytime she shows up in anything. That's interesting.
She's so good.
Yeah, the Suspiria, the remake and the original, that's one of those ones I kind of like things about both. I kind of hold them on the same playing field now. I didn't expect to like the remake, but I really, really did. So I was like, okay, they're about one and the same.
Yeah, they're pretty good. But you can't really beat an original, though. But other than Black Christmas, I know I don't want to get into all this, but like Black Christmas, I preferred the newer one than the older one. What? I don't know why. I know.
It absolutely has its own identity, and it knows what it's trying to do. So I will never fault it for that. I'm not wild about it, but it had the balls to be itself. I'll give it that.
It's true. Yeah.
All right. Well, Madam May, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I will let you know as soon as things are going to be going up, and, send you links and all that kind of stuff. And if there's anything that you, I usually do like a little intro to each episode. So if there's anything that you specifically want me to mention, just hit me up with an email, or you can text me, one of the two, and let me know, and I'll do my best to pop it in there, and that way everybody will know it.
Absolutely. Oh, I totally forgot to even say it, but I used to be a ghost tour guide, and I work at a funeral home.
What, for real? Oh man. Okay, I might have to do we might have to talk again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll tell you all my ghost stories.
Yeah,
it was whenever I worked.
You dropped that on me at the end there.
I know. It's when I was in San Antonio, so I have a whole bunch of Alamo stories too.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah. We'll have to chat again. This is, now I have a bunch of questions, but I don't have time. So.
Yeah. If you want to do like a one closer to October, if you have like a group of people that want to exchange ghost stories or whatever.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? That would be perfect, because by the time I get something set up, I would be trying to think of something to do for October. So this would actually be perfect to do like a little part 2, and then whatever you're getting into, we can talk about, and then we can talk about the funeral home stuff. Yeah, that'd be perfect. Let's tentatively aim for that. I'll put that in there somewhere, and we'll try to make sure we stay in touch so that way we can do this again. Because that'd be perfect. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, I tell you what, here in a little bit, I'll send you another email with my phone number so that way, if you want to, you can just text me. That's probably the easiest way.
Okay.
Like, I usually check my emails and whatnot, but texting, it, pops up immediately and I know exactly what's going on. So, yeah, I'll send that your way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be on here. This was a lot of fun.
Good. Well, yeah, I appreciate it. I always like talking about horror movies. It probably much to the audience's chagrin. I talk about metal and probably horror movies way more than anybody wants to hear about. But I don't care. I like it. It's my thing.
I love it too. I really like Mercury and Silver. It's pretty great.
Oh, yeah. Man, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to have to write these things down. I'm sitting here going, I got to ask about this. I got to do. But that's a good thing. I'm telling you this because it's awesome that you're telling me these things because that's very interesting to me. So I definitely want to chat some more. So
yeah, you're good.
Much. Okay. Well, thanks so much. Hey, and good luck with your mother. I hope she gets better, does well, and we will hopefully be able to meet you sometime soon and talk about horror movies for real. In person, I should say.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you later.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast. I want to extend my thanks again to Madam May for talking to me a couple of months ago, and I do want to wish her good luck in the Wichita, Kansas area with Madam May's Horror Frights. So if you guys ever find yourself in Wichita, make sure to look her up. Make sure you go and check out all of her social media accounts and her website, where you can stay abreast of all of the horror frightenings that are going to be coming up with Madam May's Horror Frights. Also, make sure you go to the PiedmontTriadPodcast.com if you want to hear any past episodes. And pretty soon we are going to have up a Ko-Fi and Patreon account where if you feel squirrely and you have a little extra cash in your pocket and you would like to give us a little bit of a donation to give some sort of a support to the program, you'll have that up pretty soon. Make sure you just check on the homepage of PiedmontTriadPodcast.com. And again, I want to thank Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers for letting us use their song Not Tonight as our theme song. Thanks to my buddy Brian Falk for all of the fantastic artwork that he's done for the Piedmont Triad podcast and our record store, heavy-vinyl.com. And a big thanks to you for checking out this episode of the Piedmont Triad podcast. Until next time, Piedmont.
You're like the devil when the sun goes down. Stay away from me. Well, I'm too far gone. There ain't nothing here to see, babe. So you best just move along.